My parents told me I was too old to live at home, but let my brother stay until he was 35. There are moments in life when you realize with a brutal kind of clarity that the people who were supposed to love you the most never actually saw you at all. For me, that moment came the day my parents told me to pack my bags. I had just turned 18, fresh out of high school, still trying to figure out what I wanted to do, how I wanted to shape my future, but they had already made that decision for me. "It's time for you to grow up," my father had said, standing in the doorway of my bedroom as I folded my clothes into an old suitcase. "You can't just stay here forever," my mother added, arms crossed, her tone full of forced encouragement. "You're an adult now. It's time to be independent." I nodded, saying nothing. Because what was there to say? I had seen this coming. The warning signs had been there for years. The constant reminders that I needed to be responsible, the comments about how kids these days were too dependent on their parents, the way they had been subtly pushing me to plan my exit as if my presence in their home was something they were eager to erase. So I left. I got a crummy apartment in a part of town where the streetlights flickered unreliably and the walls were thin enough to hear my neighbors' late-night arguments. I worked whatever job I could get, stretching every dollar, counting pennies at the grocery store, learning what it truly meant to survive on my own. And through it all, I kept telling myself that this was just how life worked, that my parents had done me a favor, that being forced to fend for myself would make me stronger. And maybe it did. But then I came home for a visit and saw him, my brother, sitting comfortably at the dining table, eating a meal he hadn't paid for, in a house he hadn't been asked to leave. He was 25 at the time. Still living at home, still jobless, still coasting through life with the full support of our parents, no expectation that he needed to pull his weight. And when I asked why he was still there, why the rules had only applied to me, my mother just sighed. "He just needs more time. He's different. You should be proud of how independent you are." I don't know what burned more, the blatant favoritism or the realization that they weren't even trying to hide it. I stopped visiting after that, not out of spite, at least not at first. It was just easier that way. Easier to focus on myself, on building a life where I wasn't constantly reminded that I had never been their priority. I worked. I struggled. I failed. I rebuilt. I learned to budget down to the cent, to stretch a single meal across 3 days, to navigate the relentless grind of living paycheck to paycheck, while my brother continued to exist in absolute comfort. Every now and then, I'd hear updates. "Your brother is trying to figure things out," my father would say when I called. "Your brother has some big ideas," my mother would add. "He just needs a little more time." By the time I was 25, the age my brother had been when I first realized how deep the favoritism ran, I had carved out a career for myself. Nothing fancy, nothing glamorous, but mine. I paid my own rent. I put food on my own table. I had fought for every single thing I had. And my brother? He was still at home, still jobless, still waiting for life to hand him something. But no one was pushing him to be independent. No one was telling him that he had overstayed his welcome. Because for him, the rules were different. For him, there was always another excuse. And no matter how many times I tried to convince myself that it didn't matter, that I had moved on, that I was better off without them, it still stung, because I had never been given the same grace. I was 30 when everything changed. By then, I had built more than just survival. I had a career that paid well, a place I actually loved living in, savings in the bank. I had made it, without them, without their help, their support, their safety net. And I had never needed them less. Which is why, when my phone rang late one evening and my mother's name flashed on the screen, I almost didn't answer. I hesitated, staring at it, fingers hovering over the decline button. But curiosity won out. So I picked up. And the first words out of her mouth were, "We need your help." The irony nearly made me laugh. "Oh?" I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral. She sighed heavily, the kind of sigh meant to remind me how hard her life was. "Your father made some bad financial decisions. The house. We might lose it." I leaned back in my chair, letting the weight of the statement settle. The house. The house they had forced me to leave the second I became an adult. The house that had always had room for my brother, but never for me. The house that had been a home for him, but a temporary shelter for me. And now they wanted me to help them save it. I let the silence stretch, waiting. I knew there was more. And sure enough, after a pause, she added, "Your brother is struggling." I almost laughed. "He's always struggling." She flinched. "That's not fair." I rubbed a hand over my face. "Mom, he's 35. She bristled. "He's trying." I scoffed. "Is he?" Because last time I checked, he was still living at home, still unemployed, still waiting for you to fix his problems for him. "That's not true," she snapped. "Then why isn't he the one helping you?" Silence. She had no answer. Because the truth was, he had nothing to give. He had never been forced to learn how to stand on his own. He had never been pushed to figure things out, because they had never let him fail. But they had let me struggle. And now, because of that, I was the one with the power, and they knew it. "I don't know what you want me to say," I finally said, my voice calm. "We need your help," she repeated. And then, the final words, the ones that sealed their fate. "We're family." I smiled, slowly, coldly. "Funny," I murmured. "You didn't seem to think so when you threw me out." She inhaled sharply. "That was different." "Was it?" More silence. I could feel the power shift between us, the weight of every year of struggle, of every moment they had made me feel less than, unwanted, unworthy. And now I had a choice. Would I help the family that abandoned me? Or would I finally put myself first? I already knew the answer, and I was going to make sure they did too. My mother waited on the other end of the line, expecting me to cave. I could hear the tension in her breath, the barely concealed desperation lurking beneath her words. She had never needed me before, never even treated me as if I was a part of the family once I was old enough to be kicked out. But now, when she had exhausted every other option, suddenly I was important. Suddenly, I was family. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make her sweat. "Let me get this straight," I said, my voice slow and measured. "You want me to bail you out? To save the house you threw me out of? To help the brother you've been babying for 35 years? My mother let out a sharp breath. "That's not fair." I almost laughed. "Oh, I promise you it is." She shifted, no doubt gripping the phone in frustration, trying to rein in her temper. "We're not asking you to fix everything," she said, adopting that sickly sweet tone she used when she wanted something. "Just a little help. A small loan, just to get us back on our feet." A small loan. I clenched my jaw, remembering the years I spent barely scraping by, counting coins to afford groceries, working double shifts just to keep a roof over my head. All while my brother got to sit comfortably at home, rent-free, eating meals cooked by our mother, his biggest problem being which video game to play next. I had asked for help once too. I still remembered the sting of my father's voice when I called them, after I lost my first apartment. "We all have to figure things out, kid," he had said, his tone completely indifferent. "You'll manage." But now they wanted me to be the safety net they had refused to be for me. I exhaled through my nose, forcing down the bitter laugh building in my throat. "How much?" I asked. There was a pause. I could practically hear my mother's brain calculating how to frame this in a way that made her look like the victim. 60,000, she said hesitantly, as if she knew how insane that sounded. I blinked. Then I laughed. Hard. 60 grand? I repeated, shaking my head. You're actually serious? We wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent, she snapped, as if I was the one being unreasonable. I couldn't stop the grin spreading across my face. This was so much better than I expected. I had assumed they'd ask for a few thousand, maybe even 10. Something they could guilt me into. But 60,000? They weren't just drowning, they were sinking to the bottom of the ocean. And now I had a choice. I agreed to meet them the next evening, not because I had any intention of handing them a cent, but because I wanted to see it. I wanted to watch the people who had abandoned me sit in their own failure. I arrived at the house, their house, the one they had refused to let me stay in when I had nowhere else to go. It looked different. The once pristine lawn was overgrown, the paint was beginning to chip, and the front porch had a noticeably large crack running down the steps. This wasn't just financial trouble. This was collapse. I knocked on the door, and a moment later, my mother opened it. Her eyes widened slightly, as if she hadn't actually believed I'd show up. "You came," she said, forcing a smile. I tilted my head. "You did ask for my help." She stepped aside, letting me in. The house felt different. The air was stale, the warmth that had once existed in this place long gone. Or maybe it had never been there to begin with. Maybe I had just been too young to see it before. I walked through the living room, taking my time, forcing them to sit in their own discomfort. And then, there he was. My brother. Still living at home, still looking like he had never once had to struggle for anything. He sat slouched on the couch, arms crossed, scowling like a child who had been forced to clean his room. "You actually showed up?" he muttered, barely sparing me a glance. I smiled, dropping onto the chair across from him. "You sound disappointed." My father was already seated, his expression unreadable, but I could see the strain in his posture. He was a proud man. He had never begged for anything in his life. Until now. "So," I said, folding my hands in my lap, "let's talk." My mother nodded quickly, as if eager to get to the part where I rescued them. "We just need a little assistance," she started, but I held up a hand. "No," I said, my voice calm. "Let's be honest. You don't need a little assistance. You need a bailout." My father exhaled sharply. "We just need a loan." "A loan?" I repeated, tilting my head. "Like the one I asked for when I had nothing?" The room fell silent. I let my words sink in, watching as their faces shifted. My mother's guilt, my father's frustration, my brother's indifference. "You didn't need it," my mother finally said, though her voice was quieter now. "You figured things out on your own." I let out a humorless laugh. "You're right, I did. Without you." They all flinched. Then I turned to my brother. "And what about you?" I asked, my tone sharp. "What's your excuse?" He scoffed. "Oh, come on. Don't act like you're some saint. You think you're better than us now just because you made a little money?" I blinked, genuinely stunned by the audacity. "Better?" I echoed. "No. I think I'm just the only one in this room who actually grew up." His jaw clenched. "You don't know what it's been like." I stared at him. "Oh, please, enlighten me." He didn't answer, because we both knew he had never once struggled, and I had spent years struggling, and now I was sitting across from the people who had let me suffer, the same people who had never once lifted a finger to help me, and they had the nerve to ask me for $60,000. I exhaled slowly, leaning back. "Here's the deal," I said, my voice calm but firm. "I'm not giving you $60,000. My mother gasped. "But I'm not giving you a single cent," I continued, cutting her off. "Not after everything you put me through. Not after you threw me out while letting him stay here rent-free for 35 years. My father's face darkened. "We are your family." I laughed. "No, I was your family until I wasn't convenient anymore." The silence that followed was deafening. I stood adjusting my jacket. "I made it without you," I said. "And now? You can figure it out without me." And then I walked out. When I walked out of that house, I expected the silence to last. I expected them to sit in their failure, to accept the consequences of years of neglect, to finally understand what it felt like to be discarded. But I should have known better. People like my parents, people who had spent years convincing themselves that their favoritism was justified, don't just accept reality. They fight it. They twist it. They rewrite the story until they are the victims. And sure enough, less than a week after I refused to bail them out, the guilt tripping began. It started with my mother. A text. Short. Simple. "Mom, we need to talk." I stared at my phone for a long moment before setting it back down, completely ignoring it. If she really wanted to talk, she could have done it years ago, when I was struggling, when I was barely surviving, when I had called them and they had turned me away. Now they had lost their right to my time, but my silence only made her more persistent. The next day, another text. "Mom, I don't understand why you're doing this. We're still your family." Still my family? I clenched my jaw, anger bubbling under my skin. Where was that family loyalty when I was 18, packing my bags, trying to figure out where I was going to sleep? Where was that family loyalty when I was living off instant noodles in a barely livable apartment, while my brother was getting home-cooked meals and living rent-free? It hadn't existed, and I wasn't about to pretend it did now. So, I ignored her again, and that was when she got desperate. 2 days later, I was at work when my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Dad. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. I picked up. What? There was a pause on the other end, a beat of silence that told me he wasn't expecting me to answer. Then, he exhaled. You need to stop this. I raised an eyebrow. Stop what? This act, he said, irritation creeping into his voice. You're punishing us over something that happened years ago. I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You mean the part where you threw me out? He sighed as if I was being unreasonable. You were an adult. You needed to learn responsibility. Oh, so I needed to learn responsibility, I said, my tone sharp. But my fully grown, unemployed brother still doesn't? That's different, he snapped. Of course it is, I muttered. I could hear the frustration in his breathing, the way he was trying to contain his anger. Then, his voice dropped. Look, I know we made mistakes. Mistakes. That was what he was calling years of favoritism. I clenched my fist. You didn't make mistakes. You made a choice. Every single time you chose him over me. He didn't respond, so I continued. You chose to let him stay rent-free while I struggled to keep a roof over my head. You chose to support him through every failure while telling me to figure it out on my own, and now that you're finally dealing with the consequences of those choices, you expect me to clean up your mess? A heavy silence settled between us. Then, finally, he spoke. We're going to lose the house. I waited, wondering if there would be any sincerity in his next words, any acknowledgement of how deeply they had failed me. But of course, there wasn't. He wasn't apologizing. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was just hoping I'd feel guilty enough to save them. I exhaled, my patience shattering. Then lose it, I said, my voice ice cold. And then, I hung up. The next person to reach out wasn't my mother, wasn't my father. It was my brother. Because of course it was. I was leaving him to deal with the fallout, and he didn't like it. His text was short, aggressive, and completely predictable. Brother, you're such a selfish piece of shit. I chuckled under my breath, shaking my head. The irony of him calling me selfish was almost too much. I typed back, quick and effortless. Me. That's rich coming from the guy who lived off our parents for 35 years. His response was instant. Brother, I was taking care of them. I actually laughed out loud. Me. Taking care of them? You mean financially? Oh wait, no, you've never had a job. So what? Taking care of them by mooching off them? That's a pretty unique definition of caretaking. He didn't like that. His messages came fast, furious, unhinged. Brother, you wouldn't even have what you have if it wasn't for them. They raised you. They gave you everything. And that was when I saw red. I inhaled sharply, trying to keep my temper in check, but the words burned as I typed. Me. They gave me nothing. They kicked me out the second they could. They made sure I knew I wasn't welcome. I survived in spite of them, not because of them. And now, you're mad because you actually have to deal with the consequences of being useless? Cry about it. He didn't reply after that. I think I finally hit a nerve. Good. Days passed. They stopped calling. They stopped texting. Stopped trying. I could only assume they had finally realized that I wasn't going to be their solution. And the best part? I felt nothing. No guilt, no regret, just relief. I wasn't looking over my shoulder wondering why I wasn't enough for them. I wasn't waiting for their approval, wasn't trying to prove that I deserved to be treated equally. Because now, I knew the truth. It was never about me being too independent. It was never about my brother needing more time. It was always about control. They had forced me to struggle because they didn't want me to have power. They had kept my brother dependent because they wanted him weak. And now that their system had collapsed, now that I was stronger than they ever expected, they couldn't handle it. But that wasn't my problem anymore. The silence stretched for weeks. After my father's last attempt at guilt-tripping me, after my mother's barrage of texts, after my brother's tantrum, I had expected them to keep trying, to claw at my patience, to throw out every manipulative trick in their book, to push and push until I gave in. But they didn't. They just stopped. No more calls, no more texts, no more desperate attempts to bait me into saving them. It was eerie at first, like the moment before a storm hits, when everything goes too quiet. A part of me wondered if this was another tactic, if they were simply regrouping, waiting for the right time to ambush me with a new angle of emotional blackmail. But the days kept passing, and nothing happened. And eventually, I stopped waiting for it. Because the truth was, they finally understood. I wasn't coming to save them. I wasn't their backup plan. I wasn't their safety net. I knew, really knew, that they had no power over me anymore. And now, all that was left to do was move on. I heard about the foreclosure from Tom. Not my father, not my mother. Tom, our old neighbor. The same man who had once tried to convince me that my parents meant well, that maybe their favoritism toward my brother was just their way of trying to protect him. He had never fully believed me when I told him how bad it was. But when he called me, his voice heavy with the weight of second-hand disappointment, I could tell. He finally understood. "They lost the house," he said simply. "Sheriff's office put a notice on the door yesterday." I didn't react right away. Didn't say good or they deserved it or I told you so. Even though every single one of those thoughts flashed through my mind, I just exhaled slowly. "And where are they now?" Tom hesitated. Then reluctantly he answered, "I don't know." "But your brother was still there when they put the notice up." He looked lost. I almost laughed. Of course he was lost. For 35 years he had been given everything. He had never once been told to figure things out for himself. Never been pushed. Never been forced to adapt. Never had to live with real consequences. And now? Now he was the one who had nowhere to go. But I didn't feel sorry for him. Because unlike me, he had choices. He had been given every opportunity I had been denied. And he had wasted them all. Now, for the first time, he would have to live with the life he created for himself. Just like I had. I didn't hear from my parents until 2 weeks later. By then I had stopped thinking about them. I had moved forward. I had gone to work, taken trips, spent time with friends. I had been living, while they had been losing. But then, one afternoon my phone rang. I almost ignored it. But something inside me, curiosity maybe, told me to pick up. It was my mother. Her voice was different this time, not angry, not manipulative, just empty. "We're leaving town," she said quietly. I didn't say anything. "We don't have a choice," she continued. "We found a small place up north. Your father is looking for work." I almost asked, "And what about my brother?" But I didn't care enough to hear the answer. She let out a slow, shaky breath. I just wanted to say, "I wish things had been different." For a moment something stirred in my chest, something that years ago might have been sympathy. But it was too late. Too late for regret. Too late for wishing things had been different. They had made their choice, and now they were finally paying the price for it. I closed my eyes, exhaled, and said the only thing I had left to say. "So do I." And then, for the last time, I ended the call. A month later, they were gone. The house was sold off by the bank. Their names were no longer tied to anything in that neighborhood. It was like they had never been there at all. I never reached out, never looked them up, never wondered where they went or how they were doing, because for the first time in my life, I truly understood. They weren't my responsibility. They never had been. I had been forced to be independent. And now, I was free. Free from their expectations, free from their manipulation, free from the weight of a family that had never truly been a family to me. And the best part? I didn't feel guilty, not even a little. My parents spent my entire trust fund, then had the nerve to ask me for a loan. I used to believe in security, in fairness, in the idea that the people who brought you into this world would never deliberately set you up to fail. That belief was shattered the day I walked into the bank, 21 years old, ready to access the trust fund I had been promised since childhood, only to be met with a sympathetic smile and a balance of exactly $0.00. At first, I thought there had been a mistake. Maybe the account number was wrong. Maybe some technical error had wiped the digits off the screen. I had the paperwork, documents my parents had shown me growing up, proof that this money existed. Money that was supposed to help with tuition, a down payment on my first home, launching my career, my safety net, my future. But the banker, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a careful voice, only sighed. The funds were withdrawn over the past 10 years. Withdrawn? My heartbeat roared in my ears. That wasn't possible. No one was supposed to touch that money except me, not until my 21st birthday. That had been the agreement. That had been the promise. I left the bank in a daze, my hands gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles ached. I called my parents, still trying to rationalize the impossible. And when they answered, they didn't even sound surprised. "Oh, honey," my mother had the nerve to say, as if I had misplaced a pair of socks rather than an entire future. "We needed it more." "Needed it more? We always meant to tell you," my father added, his voice calm. Too calm. "But you were doing fine. You never really needed the money." I stood in the middle of the sidewalk, my breath coming in short, sharp bursts. Strangers passed by, their lives continuing, their realities untouched by the gut-wrenching betrayal that had just unraveled inside me. I couldn't even find the words. Couldn't form a coherent thought beyond the burning, nauseating rage. No remorse, no apology, just expectation. Expectation that I would move on, work harder, and pretend that 10 years' worth of stolen security didn't matter. And that's exactly what I did, because I had no choice. The world has a way of balancing scales, not through justice. No, justice is an illusion, but through sheer, brutal irony. I built my own future from the ground up. Without them, without their stolen money, without their half-hearted excuses. I worked 2 jobs, took night classes, and clawed my way up the corporate ladder with nothing but exhaustion and resentment fueling me. I gritted my teeth through every setback, every unpaid bill, every moment I wanted to quit, but couldn't afford to. And now I have everything they stole from me. And more. A thriving business. A beautiful home. Investments that ensure I will never, ever know the kind of helplessness I felt that day in the bank. And my parents? My parents are drowning. They lost the house years ago. My father's business ventures, whatever excuses he had for siphoning my trust fund dry, crumbled into dust. My mother, so used to a life of comfort, never learned to live without excess. They had burned through everything they stole. And now, when they look at me, they see a lifeline. A wallet. The phone call came on a Sunday afternoon, my mother's voice, trembling, not with guilt, but with expectation. "We need a little help." I leaned back in my chair, the cold weight of the past pressing against my chest. "You need help?" I repeated, letting the words sit heavy in the air. My father cleared his throat. "It's just temporary. We're going through a rough patch." A rough patch. I thought of the years I spent scraping by, eating cheap ramen in a cramped apartment because I had no choice. I thought of the nights I stared at the ceiling, sick with stress, while they slept soundly in a home paid for with my stolen future, and they wanted help. I let the silence stretch, savoring their discomfort. "How much?" I asked finally, my voice smooth, detached. 100,000, my mother said, the number rolling off her tongue like it was nothing. "We'll pay you back, of course. You know we're good for it." I let out a short, humorless laugh. Good for it? I could hear the unease creeping into their voices, the dawning realization that this wasn't going to be as easy as they thought. "Of course, sweetheart," my mother cooed, as if she could soften me with affection. "You're successful now. It's not like you need the money." Ah, there it was, that same entitlement, that same disgusting assumption that my success somehow made up for what they stole. And then came the final blow, the truth I should have suspected but never dared to confront. The money, it hadn't been used for necessities. It wasn't spent on keeping the family afloat, on paying down debts, on anything remotely justifiable. No, it was spent on my brother, the golden child, the favorite, the son who could do no wrong, who had every opportunity handed to him on a silver platter, the one they protected at my expense. College tuition, a car, a failed business venture that they funded not once, not twice, but 3 times before he walked away without consequence. Every dollar they took from me was funneled into him. I clenched my jaw, my pulse thundering. They had never intended for me to have that money. Not really. I was just the afterthought, the backup plan, the one expected to understand, to sacrifice, to forgive. I closed my eyes for a brief moment, inhaling deeply. Then, slowly, deliberately, I exhaled and smiled. "You know what?" I said, my voice syrup-sweet. "I'll help you." A relieved breath on the other end of the line. "Oh, honey, thank you." "On one condition." Silence. I leaned forward, my fingers tapping against the desk. "I want it in writing, an admission, that you stole my trust fund, that you spent every penny, that you used it on my brother. Everything. Put it in a legal contract, signed and notarized, and then maybe I'll consider helping you." The silence turned icy. My father coughed. My mother stammered. We can't do that." "No?" I murmured, feigning disappointment. "Then I guess you'll just have to figure things out on your own, just like I did." Their voices overlapped, pleading, bargaining, grasping for any angle that might soften me. But I was done being the forgotten child. I hung up the phone. I didn't block their numbers, not yet. No, blocking them would have been too easy, too final. I wanted to watch them squirm, wanted to hear the desperation creep into their voices when they realized I wasn't bluffing. It didn't take long. The texts came first. "Mom, sweetheart, let's be reasonable. We're still family. Families help each other." "Dad, this isn't fair. We did what we thought was best at the time. You have to understand that." "Mom, we didn't think it would hurt you this much. You've done so well without it. That money wouldn't have made a difference for you." That one made me laugh out loud. Wouldn't have made a difference. They truly had no idea what they had taken from me. They had no clue what it felt like to start from nothing when I should have had something, to work twice as hard to climb half as high. But the texts were just the beginning. The calls started next. At first I ignored them. Then I answered, not to console, not to negotiate, but to listen. "Hello?" A sharp inhale on the other end of the line. Then my mother's voice, thin and wavering. "Oh, honey, thank God you picked up. We've been so worried about you." "Worried about me?" I nearly laughed. I leaned back in my chair, twirling a pen between my fingers. "That's funny," I said. "I don't recall you being worried when I was working double shifts just to keep the lights on." My mother sighed, the exasperation in her voice barely concealed. "You're still angry." "Angry?" I repeated, tasting the word. It was almost laughable. They spoke about my emotions like they were the real problem, like I was the one being unreasonable. I didn't reply right away. I let the silence stretch between us, heavy and uncomfortable. And then my father spoke, his voice gruffer, more impatient. "We're not trying to make excuses," he said. "But you have to look at the bigger picture. Your brother was struggling. We did what any parents would do. We helped our child when he needed it." I exhaled slowly, tapping my fingers against the desk. "You helped one child," I corrected, "at the expense of the other." A pause. Then my mother, her voice dipping into that honeyed manipulation I had learned to recognize over the years. "We always believed in you, sweetheart. We knew you'd land on your feet. That's why—" I cut her off with a quiet chuckle. "You knew I'd land on my feet?" My voice turned razor sharp. "So what? That meant it was okay to kick me while I was down? That's not fair," she snapped, the pretense of gentleness cracking. "We did what we had to do. We're your parents, and we had to make the best decision for the family." There it was. The family. A convenient excuse, a phrase they wielded like a shield, deflecting blame, erasing accountability. I pressed my tongue against my teeth, considering my next words. Then, finally, I spoke. "You know," I said, voice calm, "it's funny how family only matters when you need something." A sharp intake of breath, a pause. They weren't used to this version of me, the version that didn't bend, didn't beg for scraps of affection, didn't forgive. I heard my father clear his throat. "We'll figure things out," he said finally, his voice tight. "With or without your help." I smiled. "Good," I said, and hung up. They didn't give up. If anything, my refusal only made them more determined. Within the week, the messages shifted in tone. At first, they were still trying to convince me, still spinning their usual manipulations, their tired excuses, but when those didn't work, they turned to guilt. "Mom, we're losing everything. Does that make you happy? Dad, you don't understand what it's like to be in our position. You have money. We don't. Just help a little. Mom, if we end up homeless, just know that it's because of you." That one actually made me laugh, because for years, I had been the one teetering on the edge of financial ruin. For years, I had been the one terrified of bills, of unexpected expenses, of a single bad month unraveling everything I had worked for. And they hadn't cared, not once. And now they wanted sympathy? I didn't respond. Not to the messages, not to the voicemails dripping with desperation. I waited, because I knew it wasn't over. Not yet. It happened on a Saturday. A knock at the door. Not a light, uncertain tap. Not the kind of knock you'd expect from someone unsure if they were welcome. No, this was deliberate, sharp, insistent. I knew who it was before I even checked the peephole. And yet, when I swung the door open and saw them standing there, my parents, looking smaller than I ever remembered them, something in my chest twisted. Not with guilt, not with sympathy, but with a grim kind of satisfaction. They had aged. My father's posture, once rigid and commanding, had slumped. My mother, always so careful about her appearance, looked tired, drained, and yet, even now, there was no humility in their eyes, just expectation. My mother was the first to speak. "We need to talk," she said, voice soft. I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. "Funny, I don't recall inviting you." A flicker of irritation crossed her face, but she masked it quickly. "Please," she said, "just hear us out." I let them inside, not because I wanted to help, but because I wanted to watch. Wanted to see how far they'd go. They sat across from me in my living room, their hands clasped together, rehearsed expressions of helplessness plastered on their faces. And then they played their final card. "We're sick," my father said, his voice low. I tilted my head. "Sick?" My mother nodded, eyes glassy. "Your father has been having health issues," she said. "And I'm not as strong as I used to be." I studied them carefully. It wasn't impossible. They looked worn, weaker, but something inside me refused to bend. "How convenient," I murmured. "You steal from me, lie to me, manipulate me. And now, just when I'm finally free of you, you suddenly need my help?" My father stiffened. "We're not lying." I tilted my head, lips curling. "Then prove it." Silence. A flicker of hesitation in my mother's gaze. I leaned forward. "Show me the medical bills, the diagnosis, anything." They hesitated. Too long. And in that moment, I knew. I exhaled slowly, shaking my head. "Get out," I said. My mother's eyes widened. "But get out." I watched them scramble. They didn't leave right away. They sat there, stiff-backed, their faces etched with a blend of disbelief and desperation, as if their sheer presence alone would force me to change my mind. My mother clutched her purse with white-knuckled fingers, her lips parting slightly like she wanted to say something, anything, to turn the moment in her favor. My father's jaw tightened, his hands curled into fists on his lap. But they both knew. This was it. They had played every card, pulled every trick, and now they were left with nothing but the truth. I wasn't theirs to manipulate anymore. And yet, in their silence, there was still expectation. Expectation that I would break first. Expectation that my resolve was theatrical, a bluff I couldn't possibly maintain. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, and let the words come slow, deliberate, cutting. "You walked into my house today thinking I'd be the same person I was when I found out what you did to me." I let my gaze settle on them, unwavering. "But I'm not that person anymore." My mother swallowed hard, blinking rapidly. My father remained tense, unreadable. Do you even know what it felt like? I continued, voice eerily calm. Walking into that bank, being told my trust fund was gone? A flash of discomfort in my father's expression. He had never been one for direct confrontation, always preferring silence, retreating into his own self-righteousness rather than admitting his failures. But my mother? She sighed, as if my pain was nothing more than an inconvenience to her. We did what we had to do, she muttered, shaking her head. There it was. Even after everything, even standing in my house on my terms, they still believed they had done nothing wrong. I straightened, inhaling deeply. Then do what you have to do now. My father blinked. What? Figure it out, I said simply, gesturing toward the door. Just like I had to. My mother let out a shaky laugh, as if trying to pretend none of this was real. You're really going to let us suffer? She asked, her voice trembling. After everything we've done for you? I tilted my head, feigning confusion. Everything you've done for me, I repeated. Like lying, stealing, making sure my brother had everything while I got nothing? Her mouth snapped shut. I pushed myself up from the couch and stepped closer, towering over them now. You never saw me as your child, did you? I murmured. Not really. I was just the insurance plan, the backup, the one who wouldn't complain when you threw me aside. They didn't argue. They couldn't. Because we all knew the truth, and I wasn't playing their game anymore. I stepped back and pointed at the door. We're done here. My father's lips parted as if to protest, but something in my expression must have stopped it. My mother's eyes welled up, but I saw her tears for what they really were, a performance. They had never cried for me before, so why the hell would I believe it now? Without another word, they stood. My mother hesitated, lingering near the doorway as if expecting me to break, to call after them, to change my mind at the last second. But I didn't, and when they finally stepped outside, I shut the door. I didn't cry. Didn't even feel the sting of regret, only a cold, settled finality. I felt free. No lingering guilt, no ache of obligation, no fear that I owed them anything more than what they had already taken. They were nothing to me now. I sat back down, letting the silence stretch through my home, absorbing the weight of what had just happened. A part of me wondered if they would finally understand what they had done. If, for once in their lives, they would be forced to reckon with the consequences of their own choices. But I doubted it. People like them, they didn't change. They just found new targets, and I was no longer one of them. A week passed before I heard anything more. It was a letter, delivered in a plain white envelope, no return address, the handwriting immediately recognizable, my father's. I debated tossing it in the trash unopened, but curiosity won. I sat at my desk, fingers trailing over the paper before unfolding it. The letter was short. We're sorry things turned out this way. We never meant to hurt you, but we don't have anywhere else to turn. Please reconsider. No apology for what they did. No real ownership. Just another attempt to pull me back in. I folded the letter neatly and placed it back into the envelope. Then I lit a match and watched it burn. I never heard from them again. Not because they stopped trying. Oh, I had no doubt they'd continue their cycle of manipulation, finding new ways to survive off someone else's kindness. But I wasn't their safety net anymore. I changed my number, moved into a new home, built a life that was mine, a life where they didn't exist, and it was better that way, because the only thing they ever taught me was how to survive without them, and I did.